today I'm honored to be here and to talk to you a bit about plural values and how this is important for nature-based solutions. I'm wondering whether this is the button I have to push. Yes. So there's 3 short parts in the presentation. The first one is a bit of theory, early in the morning, always good to wake up. Then there is and they're all called number 1 for some reason, but I don't know. Then the second one is why transformation. This is a small but very depressing part, so brace for that. And then there's a happy ending, I hope. And we're going to start right away with the first one, plural values. What are plural values? So this is kind of a theory moment, like in class, so you need a pen and paper. It's not a joke, you really need a pen and paper. And I would ask you to write down 2 or 3 keywords for yourself. You don't have to show them to anyone, but we're going to do something a bit later. So if you take your pen and paper, and people at home can also take pen and paper and write down words. And the first question that you have to answer for yourself, but very keywordy, very short, is why is nature important for you personally? So just write down a few words. And I'm going to give you like 30 seconds of silent thinking for this. There's even music, wow, that's great. I have to do with that. So I was thinking to have like this, one of these nice animations of nature, but that would influence your... So then also write down a few keywords. Why is nature important for your city or the region where you live? So write down a few of those. For the people that are coming in, this is not an awkward silence, this is a productive silence. Yeah. And then the third one, also write 1 or 2 keywords, or 3 if you want, on why is nature important globally. And you can continue if something pops up in your head, you can add them. They're going to come back a little bit later. So let's take a look at this picture. It's a picture taken not so very far from here, at the Mechelse Heide. And what kind of values do we see when we look at this picture? The first one is pretty obvious, aesthetic value. This is a beautiful picture. I mean, opinions differ, but I think in general people will agree that this is a very beautiful picture. It's taken by Yves Adams from Vilda Photo, by the way. So there's an aesthetic value in this image. And biodiversity policy people or biodiversity people in the room, they will see, it's heath vegetation, it's protected probably, it's a rare vegetation with a lot of rare and important species at the European level. And ecologists will see the sheep and they will say, you can see how they structure the vegetation, how they selectively graze and how they make sure that, so there's an ecological value. And there's a biodiversity value and aesthetic value. And also, some will see the shepherd that earns his money through selling the sheep, but also probably through some subsidies. So there's an economic value, there's a livelihood involved. And of course, we all see there's cultural value. There's the heritage, the fact that these areas are managed in a traditional way or mimicking traditional way, and it has a heritage and a cultural value. So if we would look only at the valuation as it's classically perceived, there's a focus on economic value. And this is very important. I mean, there is economic values and they need to be looked at. But if you look at only the marketable economic values in this picture, it's the sheep meat and the skin, which is important. But it's very dangerous to say this is the value of nature. Or to say like valuation of nature, let's do it with one technique only. Because it's highly reductionist. And I'm provoking a bit. I'm showing the economic value in a very cruel way. Okay, I agree. But the same would be true if you would say, like, let's say the value of this landscape is only the value of the number of rare plants that are there. That would also be highly reductionist. So this is very important to know. If we talk about valuation and values of nature, it is multiple. Okay, so there's a number of values that are connected to this landscape, to this socio-ecosystem, but it's also a fact that these values are not found there. It's not like the species or the things you can measure or the trees you can count or the rare species. No, these values, they only exist in the mind of the people, and they appear, they are created at the moment that the people or the policymakers or actors involved voice these values, or they describe these values, or they measure these values. And this is also a responsibility of research. The moment that you research and then you create a value. And value is not situated in the ecosystem, but much more in the institutions that we create as humans. And of course, this is not neutral. There is nobody who can give an objective value, or no institution that can give an objective value, because all these specific diverse values are filtered and influenced by broad values that we have. Our worldviews, our beliefs, our culture, the principles we hold, but also the moment and the place where we are. So it's very contextual. If I do a morning walk and I see this, I will assign very different values to the sheep than when the sheep is lying, a part of the sheep is lying on my barbecue. So it's contextual. So this is what plural values is about, in Dutch meervoudige waarden, and this is a very important issue when it comes to evaluating nature-based solutions. Okay, of course we wouldn't be scientists if we could live with this very diverse and unstructured reality, so we have to make some classifications. We always have to make classifications, that's our weak point maybe. So there's different types of classification. I'm going to present the one from IBIS. IBIS distinguishes three main value dimensions. And the first dimension is the intrinsic value. Is the value of nature itself, regardless of its utility or its use or its importance for humans. And it's a bit of a tricky concept, because if we talk about it, it means that we think it's important. So it is in a way a value held by humans, but it is about nature itself. How is this measured in practice? Really, you cannot really measure the real intrinsic value, but if measurements are made on ecosystem health, on biodiversity, on how the ecosystem is doing, this is measurements about nature itself, regardless its importance or its ecosystem services or whatsoever. It could be a way to capture intrinsic value somehow. Second dimension, why is this changed all to one? But okay, it doesn't matter. So the second dimension is instrumental. The value of nature, which is instrumental to our human well-being. This can be material, this can be non-material, this can be very physical, this can be mental health, this can be culture, but it's nature for us. And then the third dimension, and yes, the indicators that are used are ecosystem services, nature contributions, stocks and flows of material, and quantities and qualities of non-material goods and benefits. Relational dimension is the value of nature-human dimensions, and it's a bit different, but it's also very important. It doesn't have to do with nature serving us, but it's the things like identity, sense of place, belonging, cultural aspects, the fact that people spend a lot of time working in nature and connecting with nature, and this is a relational value which is captured by things like belonging, stewardship, conservation activities, and so on. So what we're going to do next is an innovative voting system where you will assign the keywords that you just have written down, which are the values you assign to nature, to these three categories. And what we're going to do is a nature-based voting system. It means if you look at your list, I'm going to run through these dimensions one by one. And if you see there's one or a few of your keywords matching this dimension, you raise your hand. And if you see there's quite some, you raise both hands. And then we look around and we see how it looks. And the people at home, they can also raise their hand just for fun, because we won't see that. So let's start. Who has written down things on intrinsic value? Two hands, one hand. Yeah? Maybe people are sleepy, or there's quite some. All right, let's see who wrote things down on instrumental values. Oh, that's a little bit more. Okay, cool. And who wrote things down on relational values? Oh, wow. I didn't expect that, yeah. Nice, okay. So what can we learn from this? It's a very, silly exercise, but not so silly in a way, because if the next slide decides to appear, what we immediately see is that values are diverse. It's not like you are an instrumental person and your values of nature are instrumental. No, you hold different values. And every institution, every government, every company holds different values on nature. So they are diverse. Second thing, they coexist. They appear at the same time. You cannot have one and the other doesn't exist. So they always coexist. And the third thing is, with these values, is that they are incommensurable. Incommensurable means that they cannot be fully compared. They are very different. And probably when you look at your keywords, you will see that these are very different things that cannot really be compared, but also they cannot be fully traded, fully compensated. So there are compensation schemes, of course, that work, but they have to be accepted. It's not just okay to compensate the loss of, for instance, instrumental values with intrinsic values, or vice versa. So, and this is a very important issue. It's a bit like, this incommensurability is a bit like eating, drinking, and sleeping. These are all three very important for your health in a very different way, and you cannot really compare how they work. They are a bit similar, but also very different. And you can maybe go on without food and with a lot of drinks and less sleep for a while, but it's not very sustainable. So you cannot fully compensate. This is also an important challenge, actually, of this value plurality. And especially in cities, this is an important issue because in cities there's a lot of stakeholders coming together and there's a lot of complexity, a lot of different values, and a lot of different perceptions of what is regarded to be just and right or possible to compensate or to replace. And this affects, of course, any instrument or any initiative on nature-based solutions implementation. So these different viewpoints on, for instance, a small plant between your pavement in front of your door will already be very different. Is this nature? Maybe, is this nature or isn't it? Maybe to you it's nature. But is it also nature to your neighbor? And I don't know how the city thinks about it. Is it okay? Is it clean? Or does it need to be... so who decides what is nature? And the whole value plurality thing actually defines what nature is. And in decisions and in instruments and in actions, this definition boils down to whose values are counted and whose values are not really counted in this definition and in what is important towards nature. And this again boils down to who is represented in how decisions are taken or how information is taken up into research. So this makes the research on nature-based solutions, especially in cities, highly political. It is about fairness and representation in a political sense. So what kind of valuation do we need for nature-based solutions? There's a whole bunch of requirements. It needs to be relevant, of course. It needs to respond to a concrete policy demand or policy information that is relevant for it. It needs to be effective. It needs to value what it means to value. It needs to be feasible. You don't want to have to do a whole PhD for one street. It needs to be diverse. It needs to capture diverse values. Inclusive, because you need the stakeholders whose values are going to be influenced. They have the right to have their values represented. It needs to be transparent, and it needs to be robust. And this is called plural valuation. What is this plural valuation? I'm not going to go way deep into this, but I'm just going to show this picture from a publication, and there's going to be a much better elaboration of the concept of plural valuation appearing in the values assessment, which is upcoming in July this year. But the basics are, plural valuation is a process. It's not a technical, it has several steps, and it's not just application of a technical method. which is often what is perceived as valuation, but it has the steps which start with who is affected, who needs to be involved or represented. Then it goes, what is the purpose of the valuation, what kind of decision or what kind of product is it going to inform, which values are going to be taken up in the valuation and which aren't, because it's not feasible or not relevant, and what is the consequence of that. And then only the orange step is choosing methods and applying them, which was regarded as this is the valuation, but the valuation is embedded in this whole cycle, including how the values or how the results are integrated, communicated in a safe way, including how they should not be used into the decisions that they aim to inform. So I have said all these things. What is also very important is different disciplines. We have done these dimensions. The first dimensions, it's clearly like the more ecological disciplines, the more natural science, intrinsic values, biodiversity. Instrumental values are different economic and social disciplines. Relational values, also different economic and social disciplines, but also things like psychology, behavior, anthropology, and things like that. So if you have a certain decision that involves multiple dimensions, you will need techniques from multiple disciplines. Values, very annoying. So let's go to the next part. This is the slightly depressing one. So yeah, I will apologize already for that. So I'll talk first about IBIS. IBIS is the big sister of IPCC. It's a UN initiative, and it's structured very much like the IPCC. So it has all the states, 139 states by now, the UN organizations, representatives from indigenous and local communities, the scientific community, of course, to do all the work, not all the work, part of the work, the non-governmental organizations, and also business and stakeholders. And these are all gathered into IBIS. And what is IBIS? This is the global policy world, all the nations and the UN asking all the scientists and the knowledge holders from indigenous communities, what's the deal with the biodiversity? Is it bad? How bad is it? Can we do something? What can we do? How will it evolve in the future? And this is resulted in a whole bunch of assessments, methodological assessments, and so on. But the main ones are these 4 regional assessments and the 1 global assessment, which talk about the state and the trends, the drivers and the future, plausible futures, and policy options for biodiversity and ecosystem services. And it's really a hugely important work. Never before has humanity done such an endeavor. On a global scale, we are trying to assess our relationship with nature in a size that has never been seen before, and also it is mandated by the governments, which is very different than if a scientific endeavor or an NGO endeavor would be there. It's really mandated. The governments ask for this, and all the results are summarized in summaries for policymakers in sentences. Each sentence has a confidence statement, and these statements are run through word by word in the plenary of state in a huge discussion, and the resulting text is a very robust scientific fact, but also a very robust policy fact, because all governments have signed this. They have said, we agree with this fact. It's very rich because it has information on options and on drivers and causes and different habitats and different regions, but I'm not going to go into this. This is the summary. And I'll try to give a slightly more scientific summary now. It's 2 infographics. They are not super beautiful, and in order to understand them, it's kind of this upper circle. It shows these 3 dimensions: nature itself, which provides contributions and services, and then the connected quality of life or the well-being of people. And I have assigned colors to them. It's a very intuitive scale, of course, very positive, negative, and really super bad. And the results of this infographic, what we have done is taken all the summaries for policymakers from the regional assessments, sentence by sentence, and we have coded what value is this about? Is this about the state, or is it about the trend and evolution? and does it tell us that it is positive, negative, and so on. So it was all coded, 1,000 something, 1,300 something per assessment. And then we have made this graphic. So this is the state of nature in the world. So you can see the 4 regions, and there is nothing wrong with the color scale. This is really true. So less than 25%, there's no pattern, so to say. So all over the world, less than 25% is actually even slightly positive, and almost 3/4 is in a bad to very bad state. This is a fact. Depressing, no? So maybe the trend, maybe there's a good trend. We have been working so long in biodiversity conservation. This is the trend. It's not regional, but then it's like the types of, the subtypes of values. But basically it's the same. I mean, so the situation is super bad, but we're also going down really fast. Yeah. I promise to keep the depressing part short, but I'll leave you for a few seconds with this and to think like in which stage are we actually? Because it's quite obvious that we're no longer in the stage like, yeah, there's like an iceberg, so maybe we have to start slowly transitioning without disturbing the passengers and start moving. No, we're somewhere along this gradient. I don't want to continue like bashing you with super depressing graphics, so this is slightly less depressing one, except that the current situation in Europe has made it very depressing. These are plausible scenarios, and IBIS has modeled and calculated plausible future scenarios and what impact they would have on the plural values of nature. And I mean, it's pretty intuitive. Business as usual, which is very similar to the inequality scenario, also telling, will just bring us down steadily, make the situation worse. Economic optimism, which is a scenario which has a lot of deregulation. It has companies that do green economy stuff, but it has a lot of deregulation, will bring us down faster. But really the fastest down to go to the bottom is regional competition, which was also a bit surprising to me, but yeah, it's also not so surprising if you see what is happening today. This is also related to ecosystem services or natural resources partly, or fossil resources. This is a very good way to sink us very fast. But the hopeful thing is that it's not too late. There are plausible scenarios, and these are not naive scenarios, with regional and global sustainability actions which can actually increase the total value of nature and turn around the trend and improve the state of nature. And this graphic is not for the global IBIS results, but for the Europe Central Asia. So this makes it a little bit more close by. Okay, so that's why IBIS says transformation. Transformation is a type of transition, and now there's a whole academic discussion on what is what. But the definition of transformation according to IBIS, and this means also implicitly according to the states, although they probably don't realize what they have done, it's a fundamental system scale reorganization across technical, economic, and social factors, including paradigms, goals, and values. These are very big words, but if you think about it, it's like what Jan Rotman said yesterday, it's kind of revolution. I mean, it's turning the wheel so hard that tables and chairs are gonna fall, the orchestra is gonna fall off stage, you know, the red wine is gonna be spilled. It's not gonna be nice. It's not that we have time for a nice, smooth moving away anymore. If this is explained to policymakers, even on a local scale, you mostly get this kind of reaction. But it's a fact. I mean, there is no way around it. So I think we need to be very brave, especially on the local scale, where there is, I think there's a lot of bravery in what cities and local governments can do, because they are much closer to practice, and I think it's much more close to nature maybe, and to the people that are affected by the changing aspects of nature. So the third short, maybe happier part is about fair nature. So when we go back to the Titanic, I think when also, especially when looking at the plausible futures, I think we are here. there's a big problem, but it's not too late. If we all work together and we pump out the hull and we close the gaps, then maybe we can survive. But on the other hand, if people spend their time running to the lifeboats as fast as possible, or spending their energy in keeping the restaurant up and running and making the orchestra play as if nothing is happening, then we're probably going to end up in one of the lower situations. So we need to think about how fair are nature-based solutions, also regarding these global scenarios that we want to avoid or that we want to stimulate. So are nature-based solutions going to continue to work for continuing the concert? Are they going to work for a run for the lifeboats for the happy few? Or are we going to work together to pump out the hull and save the entire boat? And it's always interesting if you see nature-based solutions to ask whose problems is this solution for? What solution does it give to which problem? And then there's an old saying, qui bono, who benefits? Who will have the biggest benefit of this nature-based solution? And on a wider scale, of the whole nature-based solutions financing program. And this is something that throughout the very convincing demonstrations of the potential of nature-based solutions has come to light that it also has some real risks to increase or propagate inequities. And there is several very well documented cases of nature-based problems. I call them, it's when you install green and you improve the green quality of a neighborhood, then the neighborhood improves and you can see a house value going up and you can find values that go up, but the people that live there can no longer afford their house, they have to move out, and the poverty problem in the city is not solved, inequities are increased, and in the long run, this is contributing to an inequity scenario which is not going to bring us to a sustainable future. So this is very important. We need to develop a concept of fair nature, a socio-political proofing of nature-based solutions. So the Euro Horizon research projects, they are going for research, which then can maybe be developed into principles, which can then be developed maybe into standards for distributing funding, but also for quality control or quality assessment of nature-based solutions. Justice is important. The governance should be effective, and power issues, meaning advantaging the disadvantaged communities, and on a European scale also which regions are getting the money, is it the same, or are we actually going to try to solve problems of land abandonment and economic deprived regions? Are nature-based solutions apt to do that? Cities who are small and have big pollution and unemployment problems, are they going to profit from nature-based solutions? These are the questions that the European Commission also now wants to solve and that we hope to contribute to. And at INBO we have this very young program. We only just started this urban ecology program, but we are already aware that we need all three pillars. So we need to define the quality of urban nature, and we will need to define it in a different way as we define quality of nature in the nature reserve. Then we will need to advise on economic and public policies and instruments, because these are the institutions, the value articulating institutions that take some values but maybe leave some others, and that advantage some group or maybe disadvantage others. So it's really important. And then a third thing is to develop an inclusive and effective governance models for nature-based solutions in practice. And it's not that this is a huge knowledge gap, or maybe it's somewhere in the category of white spot. The information and the knowledge is largely there, but it's sitting with local governments, people that have experienced these problems and found solutions. So it's about bringing together these and creating kind of overarching principles and standards that can be shared across a bigger region. So I have to end here, but I want to thank Genk for being with us so long, or for allowing us to be with them so long, and we hope that this will continue. And I also want to thank the Connecting Nature Project for all the work, and for having us here, but also mainly to thank you both for pushing this kind of fair nature, because I really think that Connecting Nature is already about fair nature, and it's showing the way forward for fair nature-based solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sander, for this presentation, which was a bit depressing sometimes, but ended luckily hopeful. So let's go for fair nature, I would say. Now we have some time for questions. People in the audience can raise their hand, and then we come by with a microphone, and the people at home can put their question in the Hopin platform. You've silenced them all, Sander. Ah, Nikki. Okay. The microphone is coming. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Jacobs, for a very good presentation. My question is about the values, and I know sometimes people avoid this kind of discussions, talking about values and power issues because they're very contested. From your experience, and in Belgium, but also in IBIS, can you share what has been, a main impediment about valuation of nature that you found from your engagement with IBIS assessment?
I think one of the main impediments, and this was already in the openness project a bit clear, it's the choice of methods. Valuations of nature are done in every discipline. Biologists assess biodiversity, anthropologists observe people, economists observe market behavior or people behavior, or they talk to people and elicit values. But these disciplines and even sub-disciplines in economics, they tend to spend a lot of time bashing the problems of another method and promoting their method. But if they are brought together, for instance, in the values assessment, what is created is like, actually we are doing the same and we are working for the same, and it would be really good to have some kind of better standard of valuation. And many valuators, so to say, are very modest about what their methods can or can't do, but somehow valuations end up to be very pragmatic. Yeah, okay, we happen to know this guy who does this kind of method, so let's do that, and then that's the value of nature, and then we work with it, and you can do something, but in the process you leave out a lot of stuff that then in the end will block the project. So I think collaboration in interdisciplinary teams and having at least maybe 3 very differently skilled evaluators, maybe an ecologist, an anthropologist, and an economist, something like this, would be a very pragmatic way to get out of this predicament. And we also have in another research shown, or not like shown, but we have shown that it is possible to do a plural valuation at the same cost, at the same technical requirements as a single method valuation, because often a lot of resources are spent on ecological assessments to the greatest detail or to economic models to the greatest detail. But if it's spread over a little more disciplines, then the picture is richer. People are going to feel more represented and included, and it doesn't need to be all participatory, but there needs to be a representation. And it starts, I think, with the disciplines that are involved in defining the problem and not looking at it through a one disciplinary lens.
Thank you for the interesting and quite simple and logical 5-level assessment of the global state of play, let's say. But is there a more spatial detail which can be given? Because we saw these 4 global regions, actually only in some part, I think it was Australia and Oceania, where we could see the green, some signs of hope. But are there studies to aggregate at spatial levels, like even going down to urban area to see the differences, maybe using some global data sets, for instance, and then combining. Is that realistic to go in that direction, or it is a different kind of assessment and we cannot go to that detail?
Yeah, this is a very good question. This is based on the IBIS data, and they have divided up the world in these 4 huge regions. So but the data behind this are not spatial quantitative data alone, it's statements. Because a lot of this information is facts that are proven, but it's not necessarily spatial data. But I think, of course, much richer information is found in the IBIS summaries for policymakers or the technical summaries of the chapters, which then you can find out where these green spots are or what these are. Also it's much less depressing, of course, because it goes also like what are the policy options, and it divides so up the statements to which habitats and which sub-regions sometimes. So there is a lot of much richer information. Downscaling or detailing or increasing the resolution would require, I think, a separate study. Of course, IBIS is based on existing studies, so all the national assessment, regional assessment, all the review papers that are based on local research are included also. But to do like this overarching assessment of the state and trends of nature, I think it would be advisable to look at, for instance, an IBIS or a similar assessment framework and to apply it on the scale of the city or the region that you are interested in. Because the data is mostly there, it's just often not organized underneath these questions.
Hi, I came over to the mic to kind of do it. I'll stand up now. I didn't want to get in anybody's way. I wanted to follow up Nikki's kind of question about the value. So Glasgow is one of the connecting nature cities. We, for years and years and years, counted the quantity of spaces we had. We've now started looking at the quantity. But we're now having to tackle whose quality. So our professional policymakers' quality assessment is not necessarily our community's quality assessment. So to give you an example, our sports pitch providers have declared blaze or gravel pitches surplus to requirements because they're not fit for function in their mind. But in our communities, in some of our more deprived communities, they're perfectly fit for function because they're the only open space they've got, and they don't mind if they get scraped knees. And certainly in Scotland, they are now challenging us to do a play assessment and a play ability of both formal and informal spaces, and challenging us to get the views of kindergarten kids as well as teenagers and by gender. So I think there's a big thing about understanding whose quality. So there's a big push to put lots of trees everywhere. But some of our communities in Glasgow think trees and forests are the most dangerous places that could be at their backyard, because that's where people dump things, that's where people set things on fire, that's where bad stuff happens. You wouldn't let your kids go into it, and nobody's asking them if they want these trees, and they really don't want them because it's going to screw up their mental health and well-being. So it's those values that are different. So I just wondered what your views were.
Yeah, indeed, and it's challenging to the researcher, especially researchers in the nature sector, because we also have very strong values on nature, and we have to work with people who have very different values. But I think it's also, it's a responsibility of the people that design the valuation and design the instruments to be modest and try not to push, or at least as possible, for their own values. Or this is impossible to do it fully, but it's very important, yes.
I'm going back to digital.
Thanks. Okay. Thanks a lot, and see you around someday. Bye.